welcome back to another episode of Wicked Darkness. I'm Kathy, your host, and with me are members of the Two-Pit Paranormal team of mine and ours. Tonight we have Brian, Leah, Rob, Dan. How's everybody doing?
There.
Cool.
Good.
Good. Surviving the week? Well, we're doing better than what we're going to be talking about tonight. Because tonight we're kind of changing it up a little bit. Today, we're going to be talking about a person that is known here in Wisconsin, not for the good things, but some evil things that he has done in the past. He's known as the Plainfield Ghoul, also known as the Butcher of Plainfield, but most people know him as Ed Gein. So, Ed was born in La Crosse, not in Plainfield. Plainfield is where his family moved to when he was about 8 years old. And Ed has, he's a strange character. But what he's done in his past has made him infamous as far as horror films go. He is known through 3 different movies. The movie Psycho. He is the character Norman Bates is based off of Ed Gein, as well as Silence of the Lambs, and the character what is his name? Buffalo Bill? Is that Buffalo? What is his name?
It's Buffalo Bill. That is correct.
Buffalo Bill. So, yeah, I haven't seen that movie in a while, so I was trying to remember what his name was. And then the other one is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And you can guess why. I mean, Ed was a sick individual. But he didn't start off that way. He came into a family that was broken to begin with. His mother was Augusta. His father was George. He had an older brother, Henry. Henry was, I believe, 5 years older than him. And George, his father, was an alcoholic. And he was abusive. His mother was very, very religious. And when I think about her, I think about, I know it's not funny, but Waterboy, his mother.
Yeah, I get that. I see that.
Yeah. Everything is like the devil. So women were evil.
Except for her.
Well, even her though. I mean, she wasn't the best, and she knew she wasn't the best either, but she thought women were like sinful.
They are.
They're all prostitutes apparently, and they're just really, really bad people. And so he was brought up in La Crosse until he was about 8 years old, and then his mom decided she didn't want to raise her boys in La Crosse. La Crosse was evil. Now we know La Crosse nowadays as a college town. I've been there several times. It's not an evil place. It's just like any other place. Yes, you have problems there, just like any other town. But I wouldn't say it was really bad. I mean, it's a little tiny town, It's not like the streets of Chicago or New York or LA where, you have no idea what's going to happen when you walk out in some of the neighborhoods and stuff like that. But to her, back in the 1940s and 50s, La Crosse was just such an evil, evil place. So she decided she was going to her and her husband decided that they were going to take the kids to Plainfield, and they were going to raise the family there. The problem was she didn't let her boys go anywhere. They went to school and came home and lived on a farm. I mean, what kind of mother does that?
When you think about serial killers, which at the same time, I mean, he's only been, arrested for, he was
Lifetime.
convicted of 2 murders, suspected of 3 others. Most of his fame is from necrophilia and grave robbing. But when you profiling serial killers, I mean, he fits that description of your typical FBI white males between 35 and 45, but came from traumatic upbringings. His father was a raging alcoholic, couldn't hold a job, was abusive. Um, he owned a business, he lost it, so that was the only choice they had, was to take up this property in Plainfield, and his mother took advantage of that situation because even before then she thought the world was evil and she was trying to protect her boys.
Right.
So it was, I mean, he was kind of already born into it. At the same time, I can't remember what was his brother's name.
Henry.
Henry was he was the better of the children. He was treated better. He was the smarter, more charismatic kid. So he was always jealous of him, and he was always second to him. So yeah, he kind of was raised up in a traumatic upbringing.
It said too that he had a lazy eye and a speech impediment.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
he was tormented at school, and that led to it as well.
Right.
And it also mentions that when he was 16, he had a friend, and he had some shrunken heads that he claimed came from a relative who was over in Vietnam or Korea or some such. And when they were, I don't know, taken in for evidence, apparently they had human skin on them. So I found that information, which was something I didn't know before.
Right. And he, his mom didn't like him having friends.
Nope. He
she
just
kept,
worked on a farm. That's it.
yeah. So you go to school, and he did really well in school. I mean, academically, he was really good in reading. And so, I mean, he was able to excel in school besides being bullied all the time. And then having the mom that told him the world was just an evil place, and that once you're done with school, you come home and you work the farm. And so that's what him and his brother would do. But the thing is, Ed took everything that his mom, even though his mom was so abusive towards him mentally, and I'm sure verbally, but he took everything that she said to heart and believed everything that she said. Henry, on the other hand, like I said, he was like the smarter of the two, where he's like, our mom's nuts. What are you doing? Why do you believe in everything our mom says, when, she's not really a great mom? And Ed didn't like that.
Well, no, he was, because his brother Henry was more coherent and could see through that facade of life she was presenting to these kids. And I have to wonder too about that education level way out in the middle of nowhere too, as far as excelling in school. But being in a small town like that too, and everybody's got to know everybody, and I think that they would let them, I don't know, nowadays people don't let kids get picked on by other people, so they kind of must have just let it happen.
Right. Well, they talk about some of the kids and, some of the people that are still around that knew him. And they said that he was odd, but nothing really stood out in particular. So it wasn't something like, yeah, they're not going to be buddy with him, but they didn't say that they thought that he was going to be the way he turned out to be and capable of the things that he was capable of doing.
And I think that I think it's that small town mentality that when certain situations that happened around him, they never thought it was him, because that kind of stuff could never happen in their town. And those weren't the kind of people that lived in their town. So animal mutilations that could almost be directly related to him, there's no way, that could have been Ed in any way.
Right. Well, and they, so as he got a little bit older, Dad ended up dying.
At
And
a young age.
so, yeah. And so it was mom and the boys. And then, as the boys got a little bit older, Henry and Ed went out to, burn some brush.
They burn off the crops.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, Henry went missing, and Ed reported him missing. Went to the police and said, "Hey, my brother, I can't find him. We had a fire. It got out of control and I lost him. I don't know what happened to him." But when it came to them going back to the farm, Ed walked the police right to Henry's body. If you don't know where your brother is, how did you walk right up to him and say, "Here he is"? And when the coroner looked at him and did the autopsy and stuff, and it's put down as asphyxiation and an accident. But when they looked at his body, he had blunt force trauma to his head. He had bruises. It wasn't like he had the same injuries you would get as a burn victim. Like you fell into the fire, or you had, some kind of maybe
They later said that his cause of death was strangulation.
Yes.
Because he was jealous of his brother, and the fire got out of hand, and they went in there to go, take care of the fire. 2 went in, 1 came out, and my understanding was that the fire department was already there, and they couldn't find him. And when the fire was put under control, at first, that's what I mean right there, was there's no way Ed could have done any harm.
Right.
In smoke inhalation, cut and dry. Let's have a funeral.
Right. But, they think maybe Henry was possibly Ed's first real victim. I know we talked about the shrunken heads, but they're not sure if Henry actually was the first victim or if there was victims before him.
When was the babysitter? Was that before Henry?
I'm not sure. Did anybody know when the babysitter
I'll see if I can find it.
Because they suspected a babysitter, and there was one other victim that he was thought to, they couldn't prove, but he was thought to be part of, or that they died at his hand.
Right. Well, Ed was a babysitter for the neighbors in the, when he got older, the people trusted him enough to have him watch their children. And when they went around to finding some of the victims and stuff like that, they actually did find an 8-year-old and a 15-year-old. Do you remember who they were offhand?
No.
Georgiana Jean Reckler was the 8-year-old, and Evelyn Harty was the 15-year-old in 1947 and 1953.
Right. Yeah, and then Henry was in 1945, or was he a little bit later? I want to say he was 1945.
Henry was 1944.
44, and his mother was 1945. That's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until Augusta, Ed's mom, passed away that Ed really took a turn for the worst. And he's not technically a serial killer. I mean, he is in a way, but not like, when we think of serial killers, we're thinking like Ted Bundy.
We always think of serial killers with this long list, but of the vast majority of serial killers that have been arrested have only 2 to 3 victims. And that was kind of the 1 to 2 they just consider like a murder, but if it's like 2, 3 or more, then they consider it a serial killer. But it is a weird place to put him because he killed a couple people, but it's the necrophilia and the grave robbing.
Right. And the people that he killed, he was only convicted of the one. He was only convicted of Bernice, and Mary was not, even though he had said he had killed Mary, Mary Hogan, I believe her name was, and Bernice Watson. And so it had something to do with the finances back then or something like that, that they couldn't afford to go after him for both cases. It was
he was considered to be unfit for trial for the one, and
right.
then later he was found guilty for the other one, but he was sentenced to be in a asylum forever.
Right. Where
Bernice Warden, Warden.
Thank you.
Was the first name.
Okay. So Bernice, and both of them reminded him of his mother. So his mother, Augusta, had passed away in 1945. She had massive strokes and ended up passing away. And so he loved his mother. He did everything for his mother, even though she was just as much a psychopath as he was. Pardon my analysis of him, but of both of them. But he ended up, after she had passed away, he made basically a shrine for her in the house, in the farmhouse, and like locked rooms up and left him the way that she had him before she had died. And then he lived in like a smaller room on the first floor.
It was almost like squalor.
Yes.
He cordoned off her room to like enshrine her, basically. And he lived in squalor in the other house, in the other parts of the house. But her rooms that she was in, that she frequented, he like almost encapsulated them. I mean, just kind of cordoned them off and just left them the way she did and never touched them.
Right. So once he lived at home, basically becoming a hermit, but he still went out occasionally and stuff like that to the town. But living alone, he's about 7 miles. The farmhouse was about 7 miles away from the town. So I mean, it's not like he is within walking distance, like a couple of blocks. We're talking a couple of miles. But he would sink into that obsession about his mom, and he was reading stories about Nazi medical experiments and studying the human anatomy and consuming porn and all these different things that he indulged heavily on. And he also, besides killing, so he killed Bernice, he went to her hardware store. She owned a hardware store, which the building is still there, by the way, in Plainsville. You can sort of see the name on the side of the building. It's kind of faded away. But the building itself is still there. But Bernice was like a 58-year-old widow, and he went there to buy some stuff and to buy some antifreeze. And because he had the receipt, that's what got him. That's what tied him to the murder, because he was the last person to see her alive. Not to mention they found her body at the farm. So he killed her because she reminded him so much of his mother. So then on top of that, he ended up killing Mary. Mary, she actually was the owner she was a bartender of this bar, Mary Hogan. She was the barkeeper. She had gone missing in 1954. And they couldn't find her at all again until they went to the farm. And so when they went to the farm to go see Ed and ask him some questions, they found themselves in the middle of this nightmare. They found poor Mrs. Bernice hanging by her ankles like a deer, gutted from, stem to sternum, decapitated. She was shot, and she's just hanging there. And they found Mary. They found her fingernails, and they found her head, and they found all these different things. So they were able to tie things together fairly quickly, but they had no idea what they were walking into, like no idea whatsoever of the nightmare that Ed actually, besides killing these two poor women just because they remind him of his mother, they found so many more things there. That was frightful. You guys know what they found?
Well, me and you have a lot of different information, but the list of some of the stuff that I have, whole human bones and fragments, wastebasket made of human skin covering several chair seats, skulls on his bedposts, female skulls, some with tops sawn off, bowls made from human skulls, corset made with female torso skin from shoulders to waist, leggings made from human leg skin, masks made from skin of female heads, Mary Hogan's face mask. Mary Hogan's face mask in a paper bag, Mary Hogan's skull in a box, Bernice Warden's entire head in a burlap sack, Bernice Warden's heart in a plastic bag in front of Gain's potbelly stove, 9 vulvas in a shoebox that's like a box of boxes, a young girl's dress, and vulvas of 2 females judged to have been about 15 years old, a belt made from female human nipples, 4 noses, a pair of lips on a window shade drawstring, and a lampshade made from skin of a human face, fingernails from female fingers.
Yeah. And so how Ed got all these is that he went to 3 different cemeteries near Plainfield, and he would go and find these young women that had just recently passed away. And he would go in and basically dig them up, and then he would take them and take their parts of their bodies and do unspeakable things back at his farm. But did you know that he also did that to his mother? He ended up taking and digging up his mother, and he wanted to be so close to her that he basically degloved her body and wore her skin on his body. How sick is that? That's where the Bates comes into play, like dressing up like mom and all that stuff. And then, like Leatherface from Chainsaw Massacre and Buffalo Bill. That's where all this comes into play, that they ended up taking bits and pieces of Ed's life and making it into these gruesome movies. But the sad thing is, it's an actual thing that happened here in Wisconsin. And nobody knew about it until after, he had killed those 2 women. Like, they didn't know he was going to these cemeteries and digging up these bodies. They didn't know that he dug up his mother's body and took her skin off so that he could wear her skin, so he could be close to her and be one with his mom again. It just throws me for a loop.
And he was found unfit to stand trial. I wonder why.
Yeah. Well, the first time. And then he was found fit, but then again went back to, no, I can't do this. I'm mentally incapacitated, and I need to be back in the mental institutions.
Well, I believe they found him guilty, but insane at the time of the murder. Therefore, he got sent as the sentence back to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So there was at least a guilty in there.
Right. For Bernice.
You're right. But the other ones, not so much. It's just a question as to what he did and how often.
He was diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Which is odd, because that's not a typical schizophrenic type of behavior. That we're not gonna see schizophrenics trying to wear people's bodies.
Right.
So I kind of wonder if there was something else in there that just didn't get made public, because again, mental health records aren't always out there.
Right.
And I just there's got to be something else that went with this.
Right. Well, because schizophrenia isn't that at a younger age that you're diagnosed with that? Is it older?
Older, yep.
How old is it?
You typically don't want to do any type of schizophrenic type of diagnosis under the age of 18.
Okay.
But you will typically see these diagnoses happen more often in men and more in their 20s to 30s, especially after a traumatic event might happen in their life.
Okay.
Something like triggers and turns it.
See, I knew it was going to be around the 20s ish. But for me that's young because now I feel old.
That's still young.
Right.
Yeah, it's still very young.
Right. But, it's not to say that that's not some diagnosis that he actually did have. But yeah, there's probably some more underlining things that they don't want to discuss with the public. He was held at Mendota in Madison. That's where he ended up dying, was in Mendota. And I've been to Mendota dropping patients off several times. The place is huge. It's massive, and it's scary walking in there just to drop a patient off, and the amount of things that happen when you walk through the door, you hand over the patient to the staff and everything. I mean, it's a process. It's a long process. So, and it's menacing just walking through there and knowing, you're walking in, and outside it looks beautiful. There's a lake and, woods and everything. But then you walk into the building and there's bars on the window, and it's like, it's a prison. I mean, it is a prison. But it's a scary looking place where he should have been, he should have been in prison. He should have, and which he did. And he'd also been to, Dodge Correctional Prison. He stayed there for a little bit, which is also Waupun, I believe. It's changed names a couple of times, but he's a sick man. And we can probably dive into a few more things about him, as far as the timeline of what actually happened and how it happened. As far as Ed, he started off not getting mom's approval of things and being told how bad he was and how bad women were. And then it triggered things to him, but it didn't trigger Henry. But then Henry ended up saying nasty things about their mother, and Henry met his demise by his brother, most likely. You go Plainfield does not have the house anymore. That's gone away. And that's another thing that's so strange to me, is that they don't have the property there, but things happened after he was arrested. And it was shortly after, like a year after he was arrested, that they ended up going to do an auction of the belongings in the house. And that those were, you would think that they would be part of like the criminal process and the court evidence and stuff like that. And they were going to, and some people still, they have some of the stuff. They were able to still have an auction of some sort. So the things are still out there. And even to this day, you can see certain things on display. So what happened is he had the trial. He was going to have the trial. Let me take that back. He did have a trial. They were going to have an auction for his farm and the belongings on the farm. But the funny thing is, a day before he was supposed to, that just turned out bright. A day before the auction, all of a sudden there's a fire at the farm. Burn the farmhouse down to the ground. And the fire happened in 1958. And he was captured November 16th, 1957. That's when he was captured. And in 1958, they had the auction, and everything in the house pretty much burnt. But they did have something. So when I was saying about you can still see some things, Zach Bagans has Ed Gein's cauldron in his museum. So if you ever go to Vegas and you go to Zach Bagans' museum, you can see Ed Gein's cauldron that he used to boil the skins off of the bones and stuff like that. I know, yummy. Everybody wants soup now.
Today.
Did you?
Yep.
So Plainfield, compared to where we live, it's up closer to La Crosse area, and it's not, like I said, it's not that big of a town. It's a small little town, and when you go there, they don't have a lot of things that you can see of Ed Gein's anymore. They try to get rid of that. So from where we live, in the southeast Wisconsin area, we're about a little less than 3 hours away from Ed's home. And they literally try to get away from him as much as possible of the stuff that happened. And when I say it's not that big of a place, I mean, it's less than 1,000 people that live there. And there are things that you can see pictures of Plainfield back then, and go to the downtown area and you can still see some of those buildings as they are today. And like I said, the hardware store is still there, and you can barely make out the name on the side. And there's other places in there that you could see that used to stand there, and there's like an outline on the side of a building, and you can see that it used to be part of that building. And those were places that Ed had gone to. Ed, once he passed away July 26, 1984. And the sad thing is, he was buried back with his family. And he is buried at the family plot with his brother, his mother, and his father. And the sad thing is that his victims, Mary and Bernice, are buried in the same cemetery. Bernice is so he is literally in the same cemetery as his victims, which is pretty sad. And his mother is technically his victim too. But Mary, they don't have a headstone for her. She's buried there, but they don't have anything showing where she's buried at. Ed's headstone, people would go there and they would chip away at it so that they could have a piece of Ed Gein to take home with them. And all of a sudden, the headstone was completely gone. They had found it out west on the West Coast in some person's collection in their garage or whatever. And they decided, you know what, we're not going to put it back in the cemetery. We're just going to leave it. But it's very easy to find him because his brother is there, his mother is there, his father is there, and then there's an empty space, and that's where Ed is. So you still can see where Ed is at. He doesn't have the headstone there anymore. But can you imagine, as family members of the victims, to know that your loved one's killer is buried in the same cemetery, has given those rights to him to be buried so close to your family members? And I get it that it's a small town, but really, could you not have found some other place to bury the man? I mean, that's just my opinion, but as a family member, I would be upset with that. I don't know about you guys.
Personally, I think his whole story is quite tragic.
Yeah.
He definitely is a monster, but it's rather than being born one, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as where he's buried, that would be horrible to know that the person that butchered my loved ones is a couple plots away from them. He
Yeah.
definitely doesn't deserve a decent burial, but I don't know. He's, like I said, he's a monster, but he was a monster that was created by his upbringing.
It's true. Yes. But what he did, I mean, yes, his mother and his father did not help the situation, but other people have gone through similar situations, sometimes even worse, and they come out okay. And Ed had some issues to begin with, but I think the extent of it, how far he went with the mutilations, is to figure out, I'm going to go and dig up a body of a female and I'm going to wear her skin, or I'm going to make a lamp out of her face, or I'm going to put her lips on the strings for my curtains. I mean, who thinks of those things? I mean, what?
A nickel belt.
Yeah, it blows my mind. But and poor Mary, she's there too in this cemetery. But did she even get justice? Her family get justice? Because he wasn't truly convicted of her murders. Same with Henry. We don't really know if in fact Ed actually killed him. It looks like it from what we've read in the autopsy report or what it said. But what kind of justice did he get? And then there's all these women, and they don't say who all the victims are that he dug up, but the cemetery that him and his family are buried at is one of the cemeteries that he went and he dug up those fresh graves, and he dismembered some of those women, even young girls, because we said there's the 8-year-old and the 15-year-old, and just the unspeakable things that he did to these bodies. He mutilated these bodies post-mortem. But could you imagine walking into that as a police officer, or even if you got hurt, an EMS worker or something like that, and walking into something, and he's, like you said before, he is a hoarder. He lived in a hoarding house because he locked everything up. But to walk in, and then you look at the chair that's made out of human skin and the bowls, and then Rob, you said that he had the skulls on the bedposts.
That's right, but you also have to remember that one of the deputies was who worked in the store, Bernice.
Yes.
That was her son was one of the deputies.
And to see his mother hanging like that, because she went missing and then they finally found her.
Well, she went into work, and it is known that Ed said he was going to come back the next day. And I think he talked to her mom in the morning, but when he came back at 5, there was blood all over, and he was the last receipt written, so they went to his house.
Yeah. Well, and then didn't he shoot her and Mary?
But yes, but he claims that, well, I don't know about Mary, but Bernice, I know he did, but in the trial, he claimed that he loaded the gun, but it accidentally went off.
Yeah, and he also stated that he doesn't really remember much, like he was in a fog in a daze.
He would go into a daze, and that he wouldn't remember some of the situations, but sometimes when he was digging up a grave, he would remember, or he would come to, and he would stop doing what he was doing and fix the grave and go back. But other times he came home with parts and stuff that he doesn't remember.
Right.
Digging up.
But if you didn't remember it, how do you go and make a belt, make chairs, make bowls, make lamps. I mean, does he constantly go into these days like this fogginess and then he doesn't remember doing
I don't
any
know
of
the
it? It would be interesting to read some of the court reports, and I don't know if that's actually even possible, if that's because it's been so many years, is that out for the public to actually be able to read?
but I am not a psychiatrist and I'm not defending any serial killer, but mental illness is just there's some mental illness there that I just do not understand or can, justify. But I don't think a lot of them, deliberately think, hey, this is, I'm going to do something evil. I think there's always something there that they justify it through insanity.
Right. And yeah, I mean, dealing with mental illnesses, I mean, there's so many diagnosis out there for people, and the problems that they have. And he is a victim of abuse, and nobody came to his protection. Even when you look at it, when he was a kid in school and getting bullied, the teachers weren't stopping it. Other kids weren't stopping it. Other parents that might have seen stuff didn't stop it. Nobody really questioned it. Mom is really religious, so I'm assuming she went to church and nobody saw any signs there of things going wrong. Dad is a known alcoholic who can't hold a job, so nobody sees any problem there. I mean, there's so many holes that weren't filled, so many things that could have happened that could have changed just a little bit of Ed to change the situation. And I know we're talking about the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, but just that little bit of help when he was a kid, how many lives could have been changed? And would Bernice still be alive? Would Mary still be alive? Would Henry still be alive? Would Ed he might have some psychological issues still, from some of the abuse, but not from all of it. Or he could have just, I don't know, been born like that. I don't know if that's even I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't work in the mental health field. I work in healthcare, but not in that capacity. So, I mean, I don't deal with it. Like I said, I've dealt with patients before with mental illnesses, taking them to facilities like Mendota. But I'm not trained in that type of treatments. And, but just looking at all the things that could have changed in Ed's life.
If things would have changed, if something could have happened that would have changed his life, what would we have been talking about tonight?
Probably not Ed. I mean, there's going to be another Ed out there somewhere, I'm sure.
We still, despite the atrocities, we're doing a show on it. We read about it. We know about it. We watch other serial killer stuff. So there is this insanity and in these actions, we find something interesting and intriguing because, we're there, we're looky-loos at the whole situation. I mean, I've read tons of books on serial killers. I've read books on profiling. We watched, everybody's seen Chainsaw Massacre.
Right.
Does anybody say coulda, woulda, shoulda with Leatherface?
No.
So it's, and then to be able to, decipher fiction from reality, we don't really feel that way for the victims in movies. And right. We tend to, in pop culture, just as there seems to be this kind of, groupies or for serial killers. And just like the villains in movies,
Right.
Everybody, Hannibal Lecter. Everybody knows Hannibal Lecter. Everybody can quote Buffalo Bill, right? So we find it humorous and we find it horrifying, but we still look.
Right. It's intriguing. In a sick way, it's intriguing to many because and I don't want to say normal society, but society in general doesn't normally think the way that these people think. That it's just, we're not wired the same way as these people are.
Absolutely. And a lot of people in their, I guess, as far as the norm and whatever normal people really are, is that they won't see any of this will never be part of their life. They'll never see it, their families or their friends. They'll grow up and they'll grow old and they'll never see murder or have that kind of thing happen in their life. And, being a victim or being someone in a family, a victim of a serial killer is pretty slim chances. So, yeah, it's outside the norm. I would hope that people weren't getting aroused by this stuff, but I mean, it definitely is intriguing.
It is. Well, I find it intriguing as far as who has an auction of his belongings. What made them think this little?
It was supposed to. The money was originally supposed to go to the victims' families.
Right, but I mean, what? I
don't think they weren't going to auction off like the heads. They were auctioning off. I mean, his truck was sold. His truck sold for like $790, which I think is equivalent to like $7,000 nowadays.
Right.
So, I mean, it was supposed to go to the families, to the victims' families. That was.
But it was almost like with the fire though. It was like, you should not be having this auction. Like something was saying no. And
when the fire, they sent these guys to clean, and they claimed something ignited with some coals, and it started in the garage, which is not attached to the house, but it spread to the house. But somehow it didn't. There was no scorching on the ground or anything. So they believe it to be arson,
right?
But purging the evil in the land, I guess.
Well, it burnt on March 20th, 1958, and when they told Ed about it, and they said, hey, did you know that the house caught on fire, and it burnt to the ground? And he just kind of like shrugs his shoulders and says, just as well, like he had like no like feelings for it, which I get, he has no connection, but yet you would think that that's part of what he had left of his mother, but did he at that point go, well, it's all gone now, what am I going to do with, it's not, I can't go home, I'm going to be stuck here in the mental institute or a prison for the rest of my life, I'm never going to see that place again. So bad things happen there, and it's good that it's gone. But it's just weird that they had it, and like you said, it was probably arson, and they had decided we're going to burn the farmhouse down. But it wasn't just like, he didn't have things just at the farmhouse, he had it in the barns and stuff like that. I mean, he had things in different places on the farm itself.
Well, he did his taxidermy stuff out in the barn.
Right.
Or in the shed or something to that effect.
Yes. But that still stood. They were able to get things out of there.
Well, there's nothing standing on that property anymore but grass and trees.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, it's just farmland now. There's like 2 driveways going in. It's the property is on 2nd Street and Archer, on the corner there, but you go in and there's like a gate, or there was just a gate, and past the gate, it's nothing but open field area, trees, a tree line. And there's not, I mean, you can see like a little clearing where the house probably was, but they're not sure exactly now where it really stood. But there's 2 driveways that went up, that one goes around and it's a little bit longer versus the one that goes up to where the house most likely was. But that's it. There's nothing else there. And still people go to the property and try to take things off of the land and stuff like that, just to be, say that they have something of Ed Gein's. And they, if you go to the cemetery, there's, said that spot that is open, that was that's his burial plot, and he's there. So I'm sure there's people that go over there and try taking dirt or something from there just because that's what people do. And we don't recommend that. Don't take anything from a cemetery. Just leave the people be. I mean, these people have gone through enough as is. They're there to rest. No matter if they're evil or not, they're there to rest now. Just don't touch any other stuff. Just leave it there at the cemetery. But it's in the cemetery that he's at. It's a nice little cemetery. It's a quiet little cemetery. But back then, there's some houses around it, but back then there really wasn't any houses near it. It was kind of in the open. So people they didn't even know when he was going over to the cemetery, and because he was doing it in the middle of the night, and there's no lights there. So they didn't see anything. They didn't think anything of it because they weren't even near the cemetery. So, it's just, it's sad. And it's kind of funny when you think about it. Like, we have a lot of serial killers in the Midwest. A lot. Because we have Ed Gein, John Wayne Gacy, we have Dahmer. Who else do we have that's in this area? Because John Wayne Gacy,
I can't even think of them. I had a roommate in college who lived in Illinois who dressed up. What was the clown? What was Gacy the clown? What was the clown?
John Wayne Gacy.
Well, what was the clown's name?
Oh, I don't remember.
He dressed up like that clown, and there's that famous picture of Gacy dressed like that clown in his doorway in the front of his house, and you can see the address. And he went to go recreate that picture, but they tore down Gacy's house, and so he got it taken by the street signs at the street crossing there.
Yeah.
Also, I have an associate of mine that owns murderauction.com that comes out of California, and he has got fingerprints and signed autographs. He goes and visits serial killers in prison.
Really?
And he'll get stuff autographed, and he posts a lot of pictures of him and the big tall dude that was I'm horrible with names, so it's very difficult for me to.
Well, John Wayne Gacy's killer clown name, well, the clown name at the time was Pogo the Clown.
Pogo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of serial killers in the Midwest.
There's
and
more
no, don't
killers
come here
in
thinking
the
that
United
you're gonna...
States than in Europe or Russia. We're a messed up country.
Right. And no, we don't have serial killers in every corner or anything like that here in the Midwest. It's just that it seems like we have an array of serial killers in this area of the country versus other areas. I mean, New York has their own, and California has their own. But considering the populace in this area versus New York, East Coast and West Coast, where there's a lot more people in the population. I mean, we're not all farmland here in Wisconsin. but everybody thinks that when you come to Wisconsin, we all live on dairy farms and, raise cows, and that's not this area. But
that's enough to drive people to live that insane kind of lifestyle.
Right. But
I know because my wife was a dairy farmer, so that explains a lot.
Poor Amy, leave her alone. But where Ed lives, yeah, that's way up there in farmland country, and there's not a lot, especially when you go up north. The populations get less and less in the towns. Where we live is where most of the population of Wisconsin is. But when you get up north, that's when you're starting to get like maybe the 300 people in a town, 1,000 people in a town. And that's pretty big. If you got like 1,000 to 3,000 people in a town, that's a bigger town up there. And I know my family my grandmother's family is from northwest Wisconsin, and those are tiny towns. But in those towns, everybody knows everybody's business. So how in the world did these people not know what was happening in Plainfield?
They did. I don't believe for a second that they really didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
But we also have to remember like the timeline. He died in 1984, meaning a lot of this stuff happened in the 1950s. Schizophrenia is somewhat of a newer mental diagnosis in the grand scheme of the mental health field.
Mm-hmm.
And we do a lot of the coulda, shoulda, we should have done this, this, and this. But the point of it is that's not the generation, and that's not how they lived at that time. They weren't going to jump in and start with all these evidence-based practices because we're just learning about these practices within the last couple of decades. They didn't know what to do. He was always an odd personality, and that's just how they saw him. I do think that neighbors and whatnot knew what was going on, and I do think that they had their myths and legends that they were thinking about him. And then you had people who actually trusted him and had even been out on the record and said like he wouldn't hurt anybody. He's just that, weird guy. That's just this weird Ed.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that is pretty typical of that time frame though. You really didn't get in people's business, and you weren't jumping in to intervene because we didn't know really what mental health was and what mental illness was. We just knew that they were crazy or not crazy.
Right.
And so they didn't know how to intervene something like that. But if you look at his trauma, I would believe that he was likely born with something going not typical.
Mm-hmm.
And it only exasperated with the trauma of his childhood.
Right.
But nobody knew how to fix that because we didn't jump in other people's business at that time, especially in the early 1930s, 40s, 50s. And that was a time.
I'm sure that kind of help wasn't available in Plainfield.
Not at all.
We didn't have a psychiatrist at all. Counseling within hundreds of thousands of miles.
Right. But I mean, people had him, like I said before, he was the babysitter of the neighborhoods. They would have him watch these children and everything. But it's like you have nobody's going to these cemeteries and seeing all these people's, plots that are dug up, and nobody's questioning that. Like what's happening in these cemeteries. People are going missing, and they're kind of like brushing it off. How do you brush that off? I know that it's that time period that, you're right, that people kind of kept to themselves. They didn't want to, get into anybody else's business. What is happening behind closed doors, that's your own business, and we're not going to get involved. But when you go to these places and, you're going to go say on, a weekend and go visit your relative that had passed away and put some flowers down, and all of a sudden you see all these grave sites that are dug up, and nobody's looking into this, knowing that the person has passed away. There's a tombstone sitting there with the date on it when they passed away. Obviously you're not
He put those graves back though, so and they were fresh as it was that when he went into them.
Right.
So it does say that he put them back into.
Right.
He would even bring back some of the body parts.
So, but even with his mom, nobody's questioning that his mom's tombstone. I mean,
well, we're also looking at a lens of today's thought process.
True.
And we're looking at a lens of, we're assuming a bunch of people were coming to the cemeteries to visit, and we don't really know, like, was there a lot of cemetery visiting at that time? Were people that were buried there visited often by anybody?
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of assuming a bunch of people were there.
If it's a fresh grave and you dig it up and you put it back, how are you going to be able to tell if somebody was in there?
It's true.
One of the coffins, when he was caught and he was pointing out the graves that he had dug up, was it was like less than 2 feet under the dirt.
Jeez. Well, I think we're gonna have to like revisit some of these serial killers. I think that we're gonna do some more episodes of these guys, and because we're getting close to the scary time, the spooky time of the season. Not that I want to make it a regular thing at this time to talk about serial killers, but it's something that I think that should not be forgotten. These people should not be forgotten at all. And unfortunately, the victims themselves are getting forgotten, and the lore of the serial killer is very much well known. But unfortunately, this is the time that we have to say goodbye. It's been fun in a way.
What is that?
I don't know.
It won't focus. I don't know why. It's a corpse I made.
Oh, cool.
Oh, there you go. There's a skeleton there.
I love it.
Nice. Oh, nice. Well,
making Halloween. We've already started.
You have started. You're really good at your Halloween decorations, by the way. I'm jealous. So that's all the time we have for this episode. Until next time, we'd like to thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode and any of our other episodes. If there's a topic you'd like us to discuss, please email us at souphit@gmail.com. To keep listening to Wicked Darkness with Soup Hit Paranormal, please make sure to follow us. You can listen to us on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, as well as on our website, www.souphit.com. That's SEWPIT.com. If you want to see more of us, please follow us and give us a like on Facebook, Instagram, and our YouTube channel, Soup Hit 2009. Until next week, for our believers, keep believing. And for our skeptics, continue to keep us grounded. Thanks for listening to another episode of Wicked Darkness.